Bonjour, mesdames.
Thank you very much.
Bonjour, mesdames, messieurs. On va devoir commencer, s'il vous plaît.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Donc, on salue l'ensemble des participants de cette.
Good afternoon. Let's get started with this plenary session.
La bienvenue. Et vous avez tout reçu l'ordre du jour.
I'd like to welcome everybody. So you follow us also on the website. Now, are there any comments on the agenda that was sent to you on the 7 points that we have on our agenda? Any comments on that? In which case it is adopted. First point on the agenda then. Now, as you know, our website, which we've had up for a couple of years, is a really good one, a very lively one. We've got young people between 15 and 18 years around the world looking at it. And just as young people, we can all look at this and follow it. So the IPU also wants us to go paperless, so very good idea to look at the website instead. Now, in Dakar, on the 3rd and 4th of April was when we had our last meeting, and as you remember, there will be a document from that was adopted, that was on the website. Can we adopt that? So that is adopted as well. Now, the next thing is the Bureau itself. We've got some vacancies. The African group has a vacancy. GRULAC also has a vacancy. And we've received a couple of names. Mr. Mohamed Jelab from Algeria, and we also have somebody from Ecuador, Ms. Solis from Ecuador, for the GRULAC group. So let us acclaim them. No, that wasn't much of an applause, was it? Let's have a little bit more of a clap from you, please. Mr. Mohamed Jelab, is he here? You are now a member of the Bureau and the committee, so please make sure that you do attend, because people don't always, but please do, and welcome and thank you. Ms. Doris Solis from Ecuador, is she here? No, she's not here. Perhaps she's on her way. We will also welcome her to our committee, of course. Now, we've got 4 hours non-stop this afternoon. There's not going to be a break, so all the way through. But we've got 2 very important issues to discuss, and I really do want us to be very disciplined and very concentrated on these points. Now, the first of them is on climate change. As you know, COP23 is coming up, and we are going to be meeting in November. There's a document on that. That's the first point. And then the second one is involving the private market in renewable energy. So those are the 2 points that we are going to be looking at. So as you know, the Bureau met yesterday. We came up with a draft working plan on the work to be done by the committee between now and March next year. That brings us now on to point 4 on the agenda. The IPU, as you know, every time there is a COP meeting, whether that be in Paris or in Marrakesh or elsewhere, also meets. Now, the next COP is going to be in Bonn, and to be precise, it's going to be on the 12th of November that we have our meeting. The members of Parliament are invited to that very important meeting. It's co-chaired by Fiji and Germany. They are co-hosting the summit in Bonn. This will give members of Parliament the opportunity to get some information at first hand. And this will be on the main issues, the main subjects of that conference on climate change. It'll be an opportunity to interact with high-level officials and experts on climate change. As you know, one of the main roles of Parliament is to pass laws. And that is us. We do have to do our work as parliamentarians in adopting these laws, in passing these laws, and we really do need solid ground, solid knowledge in order to be able to face up to such challenges. And so with all of this in mind, the London School of Economics is working together with Columbia University and the IPU on a study on legislation and litigation on climate change. Now, with your permission, I will now call on our first speaker, Elena Aleshenko from the London School of Economics, the LSE, to give us a brief presentation of the key elements of the research. And she will also explain how to use the database that includes all this information for 164, I believe the speaker said, 164 countries. So 7 to 8 minutes for your presentation. Madam, the floor is yours.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин.
Thank you, esteemed Mr. President, esteemed delegates. I will be speaking English, given this international audience.
Distinguished delegates, and thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. Можно презентацию поставить, пожалуйста? In the next 10 minutes, or 8 minutes rather, what I will do is I will show you the work that we have been doing on tracking climate change legislation around the world, and then I will explain how to use the resource that we have developed at the London School of Economics for parliamentarians around the world. Презентацию можно поставить, пожалуйста? Спасибо. So as I think the urgency. Next slide, please. Следующий slide. This graph here shows the average global mean temperature between 1888 and 2015, and we can see that there has been growth every year in the deviation from the global mean temperature over the past 100 and so years. And if we look at the record of the warmest 17 years in the human history, the last 16 years have happened in the past 16 years, with 2016 as the warmest year on record. So the urgency to act on climate change is very clear. And national parliaments, together with executive branch of government, play a critical role. So to help national parliaments address that urgent need to tackle climate change, the Grantham Research Institute at the London School of Economics, together with Columbia Law School and Inter-Parliamentary Union, with the support of British Academy and Globe International, have put together a resource which tracks climate change legislation and also court cases around the world in 177 countries. And this is a study that we have put together, which is available at the back of the room after this session. The study is also available online. What I will do in the next few minutes, I'll give you just the highlights of the global trends that we can see on the basis of this data in terms of what is happening on climate change around the world, how are parliaments addressing it, and then I will walk you through how to use this resource for yourselves to address your own needs. So in 1997, the year when the Kyoto Protocol was adopted, there were only about 70 climate-related laws or policies around the world. And this map shows you where those laws and policies were concentrated. So just small patches of light blue. Now this is today, in 2017. We count about 1,400 laws and executive policies directly addressing climate change or related areas such as low-carbon energy, low-carbon agriculture, adaptation to climate change. If we look at the annual action by parliaments around the world, In 2009 to 2013, just before the conference in Copenhagen, there has been a remarkable growth in the annual activity of parliaments and governments around the world on climate change. Every year, about 120 laws and policies were being adopted every year. Since then, as you can see on this graph, from 2013 to today, there has been a decline in the annual legislative activity on climate change, with about 70 laws to 60 laws being adopted each year. We think this might be due to the shift in focus of national parliaments and governments on implementation of the minimum legal basis, legislative basis that has been developed in the previous years. What this graph also shows you that in the blue, this is lawmaking and policy-making activity on climate change in developed countries. The red one is in developing countries. So developing countries have been getting increasingly active over the past years in legislating on climate change. And what is very interesting, in the past years, least developed countries have been coming to the forefront of legislative activity. Now, what drives the action on climate change? What we see from our analysis, two-thirds, every third out of the 4 countries, actually have specific climate change-related legislation. However, 90% of climate laws are done in the energy sector. So low-carbon energy, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, remains the main driver for climate and climate-related legislation. And this graph shows you the key drivers. So energy and climate are the dominant one. But very interestingly, the blue line shows you development plans, national development plans, in particular in developing countries where climate change has been mainstreamed in the main national development strategy. And the number of such national development plans is growing year on. What is also interesting is that it's not only legislators who are acting, so are the courts on climate change. So in our database at the moment, we have over 260 law cases, court cases, which deal with climate change, either as a primary concern or as one of the main arguments in the overall case. And what is very interesting is this blue, dark blue area, which is 20 cases which address legislation and policy making. Those are cases where the governments have been sued by NGOs or other actors to increase their ambition on climate change. And you would know some of those, for example, Orhende case in the Netherlands are currently being considered. And we believe that trend is growing. Now, let me show you very quickly how you can use this resource to respond to your needs. This is the link to the online database. It's an open resource, each of you can access it. And that database contains, at the moment, as of today, 1,370 laws. So you can click and search by region, by country, by year, as you can see on the left-hand side, and also by the type of legislation. Are you interested in the overall climate change law, or do you want to just look at the legislation that addresses energy? Then you can also go to the interactive country map and rather search by country. If you're interested, what is India doing on climate change? You click on India and you get to the country profile, but you can also choose a country from the list in the drop-down menu if you don't like using the map. Where it gets you is, for example, here, Kenya. It will give you details on the country, the greenhouse gas emissions, what are the key economic indicators, and then provide you the link to the full country profile, which you can then click, and there you have a choice to learn about overall approach to climate change in the country in question, in Kenya in this case. You can look at the legislative portfolio, what laws have been passed in that particular country by parliament or by the National Assembly. You can then click on the executive portfolio and familiarize yourself with policies passed by governments, by the executive branch in that country. You can then go to litigation and see which court cases on climate change have been brought in that country. Look at the key indicators and the legislative process. After that, we have about 150 laws which provide English summary of the law in English language. So you can actually see what are the key elements of, for example, in this case, Kenya's Climate Change Act, and basically study the relevant elements for your own purpose. I'm sorry I'm going fast, but I'm happy to, after the session, to have one-on-one conversations with anyone who is interested. Then you can also search laws by various criteria, as I mentioned. So you can, for example, see which legislation on climate change has been passed between 2013 and today. That gives you all laws globally which were passed in the past 4 years. And finally, here is some detail on the litigation search. So you can look at the different court cases by who brought the case forward. Is it individual, government, corporation, or an NGO? You can also look at the type of the case, by the type of the challenge in the court case, and by the area, mitigation, adaptation, or both. We also allow you to search by open, closed, or appealed status of the court case. This is the example of the entry that you get as a result of the litigation search. As I mentioned, this is Urgenda case. Urgenda Foundation is challenging the government of the Netherlands in the court regarding their ambition level on the grounds that that ambition level might not be sufficient in line with what has been agreed internationally. So you will get a summary and then some key links to the original information. With this, I hope that this resource will be useful for yourselves. Here are our contacts and the link to the database. We are always very happy to engage with parliamentarians to show you how to use it, to answer questions, and to provide additional analytical information. And good luck in addressing that very important challenge. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much for that very good, very interesting presentation. Now, as you know, for some days now, we have been working on draft. The final version of it will be adopted on the 12th of November. We've looked at the document. The experts that we have here, Ms. Bärbel-Hörn from the German Parliament, and Inya Seriatu from the Fiji government have drew up the document 3 months ago. We here in the committee have looked at it. What we want to do now is have an exchange of views amongst ourselves on this and see what ideas we can come forward to improve that document between now and the meeting in Bonn. And I really would urge all of you parliamentarians to send in any amendments before the 27th of October so we can do what work we can on amending that as soon as possible, perhaps. So we will now ask our colleague from Bonn to tell us a little bit more about this document, and then we will move on to a discussion thereof. Thank you. Madam, the floor is yours.
تشکر می‌کنیم آقای رئیس خانم‌ها و آقای.
Yes, I would like to invite you to the climate conference in Bonn. We are starting at November 6th, and the end of the conference is November 17th. And even in the middle, at November 12th, we have our IPU conference in Bonn. And it would be fine to have all the energy and climate experts from your parliaments staying there and discussing with us solutions. My name is Bärbel-Hörn. I'm from the Federal Parliament in Germany, and I'm chair of the Committee on Environment, Climate Issues, and Nature Conservation, Buildings, and Nuclear Safety. And, you know, as Mr. Chair said, I wrote down this paper this first draft outcome document, and we would like to make a decision in Bonn at November 12th about this document. And we did it together with my colleague from Fiji Island. So, yes, and maybe let us talk about the situation we have now in the world. And that means, as Alina said, in the last 3 years, we had the highest temperature on the record. And even in this year, we had a lot of extreme weather events. And that means a lot of people suffering because of that, because of the floods, because of the droughts, and because of the cyclones. And even especially countries who are not responsible for climate change are suffering most. And we had, 2 years ago, we had the Paris Agreement. That was really a milestone. And I would like to thank you very much, my colleagues. I see my colleagues from France. Thank you very much. You did a very good job. And because it was really the time that all the states defined national objectives for combating climate change, and they have made legally binding commitments to take actions and to achieve these goals. And even, for example, for the financing situation, we made a good solution. And it's now our duty as parliamentarians to fulfill these targets of Paris and to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the second half of the century. So when we see at Marrakesh, that was a conference in the last year, and even I would say thank you very much for my colleagues from Morocco. That was a bit a special situation, because we had just in that time, we had the result of the presidency election in the USA. And we noticed that Trump is coming and there will be a change in the climate policy in the USA. But nevertheless, we now see that a lot of states, federal states, they are very engaged in climate protection. And so we have on the federal level, we have Trump, but on all the state levels, we have very engaged politicians who would like to combat climate change and who would like to build up renewables. And what is now the issues we have to do in Bonn at the COP23? I would like to mention 3 points: the political, the technical, and the action agenda. First, coming to the political level. From the 196 countries participating in Paris, by now 168 countries ratified the Paris Agreement. And so I think that is a very strong and very political good sign. And maybe we, as a parliamentarians, should encourage our states who have not yet ratified the agreement to do this, and all states to undertake concrete mitigation measures before 2020, as we decided in Paris, and to formulate our national determination. Because when you put all the pledges we made in Paris on the table, it's not 2 degrees or well below 2 degrees, and it's not 1.5 degrees, but it's 3 degrees. And that means we must be more ambitious in the future. And that's the second point I would like to mention, that is the technical level. Because if we would like to be more ambitious, it's important to make good progress on details, strong rules and basic requirements. We must make an initiative for stock-taking of mitigation ambitions and to identify concrete opportunities for an increase in ambition. And the third, I will come to, that is action level. So we have a broad alliance, climate initiatives to create there in Bonn. And even we have from Fiji, we have the plan to install a 1.5 Celsius degree initiative. And I think my colleague from Fiji will tell more about that. But we have another good ideas from many governments and non-government stakeholders. And for example, some of my colleagues and me, we would like to start with an international network for parliamentarians who are interested in increase of renewables, because it's now the next point to fulfill Paris. And I think it's very important to make an exchange of the experience we have. So not every parliamentarian has to find the solution, but we can hear from the others. What is the solution in one country? And how can we overcome a resistance? And what are good examples? So on Monday, after our IPU conference on Monday, we will have a breakfast for all these parliamentarians who go to Bonn, and then start with this parliamentarian network. And if you are interested in, there is my staff sitting here in the first row, and you can have a flyer and give it to your experts in your parliament. Yes, so I think we are on a good way, and because renewables are now competitive. And with these renewables, we can build up new jobs. For example, in Germany, we created 70,000 new jobs. 370,000 new jobs. 370,000 new jobs. And that's a lot. So we can fight poverty, and we can combine our climate issues with sustainable development goals, with good governance, with combating poverty and hunger, with social goals, with gender goals. Yes, I think that is very, very important to do so. Yes, finally, I would like to invite my colleague on my left side from Fiji, because we are working very close together, because Fiji holds the presidency. And I think that's very, very important for Bonn, because we have the special view of islands. And that's a very vulnerable situation for these islands. And so it's good for us to discuss all these aspects. Yes, I'm optimistic that we can handle the crisis, but we must take a responsibility and we must take action. And so we can start, we can begin today, and we can continue in Bonn. Thank you very much for that.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that excellent presentation. Well, we're lucky to have another speaker, and our deputy friend, John Zermatt, just next to us. We're going to give him the floor, and then after that we shall proceed to a debate.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm here in place of the Honorable Inya Seruratu, who is our climate change champion in Fiji, who was supposed to have been here. But it's great for me to be given an opportunity to speak to this, especially with the partnership that we have with the government of Germany, not only for the COP23, but also for the program that will be discussed by the members of parliament at the event that will be held in Bonn. I think what I'd like to speak about this afternoon is just to talk about climate change in the perspective of small island developing states like Fiji, and why Fiji has pushed itself forward to be part of the project towards COP23 in this that will be happening in November this year. Climate change in the Pacific Islands, and especially amongst the small island development states, is not something that presents a danger in the future, but it's something that presents danger right now. Its impact right now is being felt in the Pacific and all the other small island states. And Fiji is a country that has been experiencing this. In the small island states of the Pacific, our ancestors, the people the Pacific Islands, they were the greatest ocean travelers of their time. They traveled in my country, in Fiji. People came on great boats 3,500 years ago, while in other parts of the world, people were sailing across, just hugging the shores. Our ancestors were moving across oceans to fill and people the Pacific Oceans. But it is now that ocean that they conquered 3,500 years ago. It is that very ocean, as a result of climate change, that is now going to impact on their very lives. And that is something that is happening today. The small island states like Fiji, they rely on the oceans. Climate change is having a big impact on the ocean in terms of the sea level rise that is seeing. This morning we were talking about there are countries in the Pacific like Tuvalu, the representatives are here, and the Marshall Islands and Micronesia. these are countries that don't have a height of more than 2 or 3 meters or 6 meters. So when the sea level rises, it has an impact on them. Today, in the Pacific, in Fiji, oceans are taking away villages. They are removing villages. They are removing traditional burial grounds. These burial grounds are no more. They are removing your access to food. The places where you used to plant your food is now inundated with seawater, and you cannot farm anymore in these places. So it is something that's having an impact on life right now in the Pacific. Our neighbors in the Pacific, the islands of Kiribati, in the Pacific, they have already come to Fiji to purchase land so that they can move if their islands sink. They've purchased land to come and grow food so that they can look after the people in their own countries. That is the impact. Our Prime Minister in Fiji, who is also going to be the president of COP23, has offered assistance to the islands of Kiribati and Tuvalu. In case they sink, we will offer them to come to our country. And this is something that we hope other members of parliament can also take cognizance of. There will be climate change displacement. The world has to take note of this and be prepared to be able to offer assistance to countries that need that. Already in Fiji, we have villages that are being relocated, and we have lists of other villages that will need to move as a result of this. We have seen the rising of acidification of the oceans. And this, of course, is killing our corals. And in the Pacific and the islands, when you kill coral, you kill life. Because it is the coral that gives us a fish that sustains us. And when we kill that coral, we are killing life itself. So climate change is now contributing to the death of our oceans. And for all small island developing states, when you kill the oceans, you kill life itself. You also have an impact on the climate in that area. We are seeing now that it has been amply illustrated in the graphs that have been given to us this afternoon, that the temperature is rising. We are now seeing that the vectors that normally take diseases, mosquitoes and so forth, they are appearing in all kinds of places that they never appeared before. So diseases that affect us, chikungunya, dengue, and all of these that are vector-borne, these are beginning to infiltrate into places where they've never been before. So it's a huge challenge into these areas. In the small island states, we always know our seasons. We know when the fruits, they flower at different times. All of that has gone all chaotic. Things are flowering at all different times. So all of that, the traditional knowledge itself on how to sustain life is being challenged. Increasingly, weather is becoming unpredictable. Category 5 cyclones are now something that we now expect every year in the Pacific. We've never had them before. Now we have them every year. We've had Cyclone Winston in Fiji. We've had Cyclone Pam in Vanuatu, also in the same year. And now we're seeing this begin to happen all over. There are more severe floods, and Category 4 and 5 cyclones are becoming the norm. And this is a challenge for small island states like Fiji. One event, just one event, can turn a country from a middle-income country into a least developed country. Just one event. That's because of the small size of the countries. My country has less than 1 million people. We are considered a large country in the Pacific. We have less than 900,000 people. But we have countries in the Pacific that have 10,000 people. One event will wipe out that country, just one. So that's why, for us, being part of this event, being part of this climate change, being part of COP23 is something that is a matter of life and death. Not that some hazy something that's in the future, but something that's happening right now. And that is also one of the reasons why Fiji has been asked to assume the presidency of the COP23. And we know that it is an opportunity for us. Our Prime Minister will become the first Pacific Islander to do this. We have been glad to be able to take up this role because we know that when we participate in this role, we have an opportunity to bring forth the voice of the small island developing states and make sure that their vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities that they face, are brought up on the world stage. Fiji has, in the past, contributed globally to peacekeeping. We have sent soldiers everywhere to keep the peace. But now, through this COP23 and the things that we are contributing to climate change, we have an opportunity to save life itself. And I think that is the challenge for us now, to be able to save life itself. And we hope that by collaborating with other parliaments that are represented here today, that we can do something together to make sure that humanity flourishes. There are a number of things that we want to focus on. One, Paris was a huge step, and I thank all those that were involved. But the ambitions that were demonstrated in Paris are not enough. If all the ambitions that were given in Paris come to light, we will still get a temperature increase of 27 degrees, which is too high for us. We will push very strongly, and we encourage all parliaments in the world to push for a temperature increase of no more than 1.5 degrees. If we get a 2 degrees Celsius increase, there will be countries in the Pacific that will disappear. So we hope that all parliaments will come to Paris, will come to Germany and work with us in those particular areas. And we hope also that as a result of this, we will have more funds made available for adaptation, so that there will be easier accessibility of funding to the small island developing states. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur John. Je crois.
Yes, thank you, John. I think we have heard two very good presentations from Albert Ann, who has explained what happens at Bonn, and John, who's described the very tragic circumstances facing his country if we do not respond now and try and keep temperatures down to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Those people who wish to put their names on the list of speakers may do so. For the time being, I have 7 on my list, and we've only got 35 minutes, so each person will have 2 minutes in response to these issues. And later we may have another round. I give the floor to Mr. Ari Babu of India.
Madame Lilia.
And if Ms. Lilia from Algeria would get ready.
And distinguished delegates, the catastrophic consequences of climate change are now well known. The grave problem that confronts the whole humanity requires urgent collective efforts to minimize environmental damage. Saving the earth is our shared responsibility, a commitment which we must meet for the safety and well-being of our future generations. I feel happy that more and more developing countries are coming forward to ratify Paris Agreement, which is a signal of their willingness to tackle the challenges of climate change in the post-2020 period. However, it is also of critical importance to accept the Doha Amendment, which ushers in the second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol. Doha Amendment is based on the common but differentiated responsibilities for the mitigation ambition in the pre-2020 period, and low ambition by developed countries in the pre-2020 period may amount to transferring responsibilities to developing countries in the post-2020 period. India is strongly in favor of full implementation of the decisions under the Bali Action Plan, particularly on the provisions of technology transfer, finance, and capacity building support for the developing countries. The plan provides opportunities to strive for mitigation without compromising on economic growth. At the UN Climate Change Conference scheduled to be held in November 2017 in Bonn, we must reiterate that the primary responsibility of taking concrete initiatives towards reducing global greenhouse gas emissions should continue to lie in the developed countries in accordance with the principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The comprehensive work program for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, including guidelines for nationally determined contributions, technology transfer, or other elements of the Paris Agreement should be in line with these principles. We would also like to emphasize on the need to scale up financial support to be provided to developing countries for effective implementation of their mitigation and adaptation actions, with due emphasis on providing them with appropriate technology and capacity building tools. We would like clarity on Green Climate Fund and the type of financing that will be available, the balance between loans and grants, and between funding for adaptation versus mitigation, as well as the process of replenishment of these funds. One of the key features of the Paris Agreement is the provision for nationally determined contributions, which are voluntary and country-driven in nature and would come into force after 2020. I believe it is important to give the consideration to the country-driven nature of all efforts to tackle the problem of climate change. So far as India is concerned, We have already initiated work on developing a roadmap for the implementation of our nationally determined contributions in the post-2020 period. Distinguished delegates, the issue of climate change and environmental sustainability has been emphasized time and again in various IPU conferences. We in India are also deeply committed to environmental protection. We have a national policy on environment. We also have a parliamentary committee on science and technology and environment and forests to ensure the accountability of the public institutions working in the area of environmental protection. We have taken a number of other initiatives to address climate change. We have launched 8 national missions under our National Action Plan for Climate Change. 3 new missions have also been announced on coastal areas, health and waste to energy. Many of our developmental schemes are oriented towards energy conservation and environmental protection. We are also committed to achieve 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2022. Government of India targets to introduce electric vehicles by 2030. Government of India encourages the technology transfer to achieve Make in India program a success to reduce the carbon emissions by encouraging renewables. Finally, we as parliamentarians should keep the issue of climate change high on the list of our priorities and campaign for global cooperative efforts based on equity and just burden sharing. Thank you very much.
Merci, on vous a bien écouté.
Thank you. We listened carefully. I would like the people taking the floor henceforth to keep to the 2-minute time constraint. Otherwise, we won't have enough time to hear all the speakers and the debate will not be very interesting. We will have taken up too much time. Thank you. Ms. Lilia of Russia, you have the floor.
Спасибо большое, уважаемый господин.
Thank you very much, esteemed chairperson, esteemed colleagues, esteemed presidium. I would like to say that traditionally the upper chamber of our Federal Assembly, the Council of Federation, has been paying a huge attention to the climate change, and there was a lot of events under the auspices of our House. I would only mention several of them. In 2015, there was a parliamentary hearing for the agenda after 2015, which resulted in practical resolution about the practical implementation of the Agenda 2030, including countering climatic change. The issue of energy in the context of climate change and sustainable development was discussed in September 2017 during the International Forum Women for the Energy of the Future. I would like to mention that this year has been announced the Year of Environment and Specially Protected Territories in Russia, and we had the 8th Nevsky Environmental Forum, and within that there was a Russian-French parliamentary workshop about the climate change and decisions which lead to its countering. But many people ask how the parliamentaries can facilitate resolving these issues, and I think it's very important for us to concentrate on the lawmaking aspect of it and exchange practices. In that sense, the Inter-Parliamentary Assembly of a CIS experience would be very useful. That is an assembly headed by Madam Matvienko. And when we collect the experience of all of the CIS countries and make conclusions that may be used by other states, and we think that's very productive and efficient, over 50 decisions were made during the history of the Assembly, and the issues of climate change were touched upon in these model draft laws, and I think that IPU could also use that experience. I believe that a very big international forum, and that is the 21st International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg was also attended by delegates from our house, and one of the subjects discussed at that forum was how the technologies impact the energy balance. We are ready to share our experience, and Russia can provide very good legislative framework which may be of interest to other states for promoting these issues. Thank you for your attention.
Vous avez pris 3 minutes, c'est un peu trop. On va...
Well, 3 minutes, that was a little bit too long. Let's go back to 2. Mr. Tinuru from Tuvalu.
Il est là?
Is he in the room? He's not there. Mr. Victoire Tamoa from Samoa, please get ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to contribute. I'll be brief as you asked. So on behalf of the Samoa Parliament, I would like to voice Samoa's support in amending the IPU outcome statement in 2 ways. 1, make a clear commitment that temperature rises must be limited to 1.5 degrees. Parliaments need to lead on this issue and make government of the large polluting countries do more. 2, mention in the outcome statement that we need to simplify the process for small, vulnerable countries to receive climate finance to pay for these adaptation measures. The system currently is so complicated and bureaucratic that many of the most vulnerable states find it difficult to access these funds. I would also like to engage the great powers that were in the Pacific during the late 1800s as well as the early 1900s, that to please have your support, especially Germany, who has a special relationship with Samoa when Samoa colonized them back in the late 1800s to the early 1900s. To be safe, I'll say vice versa. Thank you for the opportunity.
Bien, merci d'avoir été très bref.
Fine. Thank you for having been so brief. That was very kind of you. The next speaker, we said Mr. Victoire Damopoa of Samoa. Is he there?
Il est en salle?
Is he in the room?
It's me that has just shared our contribution. Thank you from Samoa.
Okay. Donc, Monsieur Kenneth Keddy.
Mr. Kenneth Keddy from the Marshall Islands.
Et Madame Bani Mustafa se prépare de la Jordanie.
Ms. Bani Mustafa, please get ready from Jordan.
Shukran.
Thank you. Speaker Keddy from the Marshall Islands, one of the low-lying nations present in this prestigious IPU conference, fairly 6 feet above water, no hills, no mountains. Let me affiliate myself with the statement made by my colleague from the island of Fiji, the Samoa, and other small island developing states from the Pacific Ocean. As leaders, I believe we owe the future of our children and grandchildren to fight fiercely in letting the world know that climate change is not a shenanigan as some think and thought that it is. It is not a only a data on computer and computer models, but in our case in the Marshall Islands, it is an imminent threat to us. It is a human right violation to us. It is our very existence and our life. When we have inundations of water on our crops, in our homes, no hills to climb or mountains, we are being violated. is a small contributor to the climate change and greenhouse emission effects of climate change. It is injustice for a small island country like ours to have to deal and face this imminent threat. So we're calling on all nations, big or small, to take the bold leadership now, not tomorrow, but yesterday, to ensure that we have a safe future for our children and grandchildren. What affects us in the Marshall Islands today will affect you tomorrow. The rest of us in this conference. If you can't save Marshall Islands and our small island developing state, you certainly can't save yourselves and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Merci, c'est vraiment intéressant quand vous dites que ce n'est pas.
Well, that is very interesting. It's true, this is not a game. This is a very serious matter, and everybody should take it seriously. Mr. Bani Mustafa.
Thank you, sir. I have a few comments. I would first like to thank those who drafted this document, Ms. Barbara Lone and the gentleman from Fiji. And I have comments that I have sent to the Secretariat of this committee. I would have preferred that there is a clearer expression about regret at the withdrawal of the United States from COP, from the Paris Agreement, and to note that we as parliamentarians view this agreement as a means to protect future generations all over the world, and that withdrawal from this agreement is a giving up of a common responsibility, or the international responsibility towards all countries, especially that the industrial countries are the ones that cause the greatest pollution that leads to this increase in temperatures. I have another proposal in item 3 regarding the fund and the support specified at $100 million to support actions for safeguarding the environment. I suggest that we should also support refugees of climate change as a result of climate change, refugees and displaced people. There is such a phenomena that currently exists. We have climate change refugees and displaced persons. My last comment is that we need to clearly note actions pertaining to renewable energy. I think we did not talk about investment in electricity grids. I think we need to have a system of by which renewable energy can be connected to the electricity grid to make sure that there is a flow of this renewable energy 24 hours, 24/7, and that renewable energy projects should be supported and financed, whether through loans or grants, to enable the least income countries, least income families, low income families to benefit from these loans. And I have submitted these comments in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. J'avoue que j'ai beaucoup aimé.
Thank you. I must confess I very much like your statement, which links back to the one before last, that climate change is a crime against humanity. Of course, we do regret that America lies outside this cooperation system. Governments are one thing, and parliaments may speak loudly. Sometimes parliaments are not afraid. MPs consider that not cooperating with COP is a crime against humanity, and thank you for that. I now give the floor to Mr. David Forlaline from San Marino, and Mr. Khalid Abdul, please stand by.
The world is facing the big issue of climate change in several ways. The citizens, especially in the richest countries, are sensitive to climate change thanks to the public campaign of information and cultural education. However, these countries are also the most involved in climate change due to the huge human activities, especially around factories and cities. Since the problem is due to both human activities and natural events, all our communities should consider climate change in a multidisciplinary perspective, taking into account social, economic, and human impacts. The consequences in quality of life are fundamentally important and affect the world communities. Therefore, every country, in my opinion, should think globally and act with local implementations. In this regard, sustainability has become urgent, and any parliament has to do its own role in preserving from climate change. In addition, I think that dissemination and communication formation at any levels are fundamental. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed. There are quite a number of people wanting to take the floor. We still have another 10 people on the speakers list, and we have half an hour for this debate. And we do want to hear from our experts responding to the debate. So the speakers list is now closed, and those who are on it, I would request please to restrict yourselves to 2 minutes maximum. That is 20 minutes already, and that gives each of our experts 5 minutes to respond. Mr. Khalil Awudu.
Chairman, and I would like to thank the panel, all of you, for raising this, bringing forward this important issue, and it is very crucial for our future and our generations, next generations. Now, one question to our scientist, Dr. Elena. I think I need to know, what do you think is the reason why parliaments are not interested in or not focusing enough on the climate change matter? What are the reasons? Could it be possible that we think we are negligible, our bad effect to the climate is not that crucial, that's why we're not interested or we're not focusing on it? Or we think that it is other people doing the damage to the climate, so they should change their laws. I think we need to know who's destroying the climate, who's affecting the world's climate. Is it countries that have oil and have the carbon emission and so forth? Is it countries that are destroying forests? Or is it countries that are doing nuclear testing and so forth? Who's doing it? And to what extent, how much are they affecting the climate, so we know what is our responsibility and what is others' responsibilities. Last thing, I try to be very short. I have half a minute. Cost of technology transfer and knowledge transfer. It is very expensive. This needs to be addressed. And finally, it is not each individual parliament's duty to do this. It's the world's responsibility, and we thank our friend from Russia. We will knock your door and ask for the template of the legislation that you have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Merci beaucoup. On passe la parole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Warren William from Seychelles. And then Cristobal will be the next one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak on behalf of the Republic of Seychelles and the Republic of Fiji. We organized and co-chaired a meeting in the margins of the IPU conference for small island developing states. We have a 9-point declaration. I am mindful of your advice that we should stick to 2 minutes for our intervention. I am therefore suggesting, with the agreement of the speaker from Fiji and colleagues from the small island development states, that we will submit the 9-point declaration to the Secretariat in order that this may be made available to the conference in Bonn in November, the COP23 conference, because if I do read the declaration as is, as we agreed in the SIDS meeting, it will take more than 5 minutes. I want to respect your allocation of 2 minutes, so with your agreement, I will submit the declaration, the 9-point declaration, to the Secretariat as long as we get a guarantee that it will be fielded or tabled in Bonn in November. Thank you, Chair.
C'est une très très bonne idée. Donc,
that's an excellent idea. So we'll make sure that we do submit that so that it can indeed be incorporated into that debate and that work. Mr. Cristobal Nuretz will be the next speaker, and then Ms. Vasika Khan from Bangladesh.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Un cordial saludo para todos.
Thank you very much. And I would like to bring in my greetings on behalf of my delegation to all of you. All of us as human beings share one home, and it knows no boundaries. And therefore, it is very important for us to discuss these issues and realize quite how important they are. It's vital that we air them here in this Inter-Parliamentary Conference. Economic development is, of course, a big challenge for all countries. GDP has to grow to deliver economic prosperity. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we harness economic development so as to strike the right balance between economic prosperity and environmental concerns. And all the powers at a global level have to be aware of the importance of all these issues. It is the international community that signs up to agreements such as the Paris Agreement, and it is these governments that have a big responsibility to deliver the goals that have been set down in the document which has been agreed. We hope that COP23, which will be meeting very shortly, will take forward a bit further the commitments that were made in Paris so that the policies and goals that have been agreed at global level can actually be implemented. This is absolutely essential. The countries which generate most pollution must deliver the goals that were agreed in Paris and must sign up to protecting the global community and planet Earth, which is the home of all mankind. There are very, very important decisions at stake. Ecuador in 2008 modified its constitution so as to recognize the right to protection of nature as an integral part of the constitution. This is a fundamental step and extremely important to raising awareness of the importance of environmental protection in our country. This is also a political step, and it's extremely important, and it's one that others could well do to replicate. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. The next speaker is Ms. Vasika Khan from Bangladesh, followed by Mr. Jamal Fakhru from Bahrain.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panelists. Greetings from Bangladesh. I'm from this coastal area, which gets inundated almost every day due to the rising sea levels. And we have contributed the least to the problem of climate change. Bangladesh would like to see negotiations in Bonn moving from conceptual discussions to technical work and texts across all bodies on the work program on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. One of the analysis concludes that even if all the NDCs are nationally determined contributions are successfully implemented, they lead us to global temperature increases of more than 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Each party should ensure that its NDC reflects the party's highest possible ambition in light of its national circumstances and of recommendations by science. The rich countries must create zero carbon economies over time by phasing out their high emissions. Bangladesh would like to emphasize the urgency of availability of financial support for the preparation and implementation of the National Adaptation Plan. Mobilizing adequate finance for adaptation and mitigation initiatives in developing countries in accordance of the Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. COP23 provides the opportunity for developed countries to revisit their commitment to undertake pre-2020 actions. Bangladesh may emphasize on the concrete progress or signal with regards to the operationalization of the US $100 billion per year from 2020 and other resources for developing countries. Experiences suggest future funds allocated to developing countries should be in addition to ODA. The allocation process should be transparent and be brought under Article 13 and 15 in compliance of the Paris Agreement. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Chair.
Merci beaucoup, c'est gentil.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Jamal Thakare from Bahrain, followed by Umar Amayel from Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to thank the panelists from Fiji and Germany. This is an extremely important topic, and we have already discussed it in previous conferences. Concern is increasing nonetheless, and we are still lacking effective solutions. Unfortunately, we are discussing today the Paris Agreement, in which we took part as a parliament and which we have supported. But we see today that the largest superpower is withdrawing from that agreement, and it is the largest industrial country in the world, which is negatively affecting the global climate, and we as countries can do nothing in this regard. Therefore, I think that it is extremely important for this conference and for this committee to work relentlessly in order to meet with other parliamentarians in the United States and in those countries that did not ratify so far the Paris Agreement, to incite them to reconsider and sign that agreement. We are discussing globalization, and we know that globalization is not confined to economy. Globalization means sustainability. Globalization means safeguarding the rights of peoples and improving them. Globalization means that we, hand in hand as countries, should work for the protection of our peoples, our communities, and nature. I think that we are responsible before future generations, and as parliamentarians, we have to do something about it. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Nous allons écouter M. Donko.
Thank you very much. Mr. Omar Amaleh from Palestine, and then Nuruddin Naslik from Morocco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second my colleagues, especially my colleague from Bahrain, who said that climate change is one of the most difficult problems facing today's countries. And it has very negative consequences that are increasing in time. Therefore, we as parliamentarians have huge responsibilities. We are short of time, and if you allow me, I would like to tell you about the experience of Palestine in curbing climate change. Even though our experience is new, but we have witnessed important developments in the environmental dossier. You know that Palestine joined the Framework Agreement of the United Nations for 2014, 2 years only after it was accepted as an observer state in the United States. And we have played a pioneering role in joining the Paris Agreement along with 15 other states. Palestine was the only or the first state in the Middle East joining the Paris Agreement. At the governmental level, the government has elaborated a report on the NDCs, and we have also prepared a national action plan for sustainable consumption and production. We have prepared a plan for the protection of the Mediterranean in the frame of the Barcelona Agreement, and the government has also adopted a national day for the environment in Palestine. But as you know, all these plans and the governmental efforts need two things. First, Palestine should have control over its own territories and resources. And this can be done by ending occupation and spreading the sovereignty of Palestine over all its resources. And the second condition to implement these plans is to provide the financing and the technical resources that would allow the Palestinian people to curb the consequences of climate change. Therefore, I would like to call upon the organizers of the Bonn conference to take this into account, and thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. We're going to hear from Mr. Nuruddin from Morocco, Mr. Samap Karyos from Turkey will be the following speaker, with my apologies for any mispronunciation of names. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. You know that Morocco hosted COP22. COP23 is taking place next month, as everybody knows, and I hope that all members of Parliament will stand up for the recommendations of COP22. You know that we too deplore the fact that the United States has decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Morocco has set itself a clear objective, namely of achieving 42% of renewable energies. At the moment, we have achieved 26%, so 42% by 2020, which is our target, is quite an achievement. 2030, we would like to have achieved 50%, and we're going to be using wind and solar and hydroelectric energy generation. In 2016, we inaugurated NOR 1, and we will be moving up to 2, 3, 4, and 5. It is a solar array, as you may know, and it's the largest solar array the world over. The target generation is 580 million megawatts. It's 2 billion euros, the cost of it. $680 square hectares is the size of it, so it's a considerable size. So 52% is our target, not least because we realize that we've got to protect the environment as best we possibly can. We need to cut CO2 emissions, and we need to make progress in Bonn for these reasons. Thank you very much, says the Chairman. Mr. Samap Karyos from Turkey is the next speaker, and then Mr. Hubert Julien from France will be the following speaker.
Voilà. La Turquie n'est pas là.
Is the speaker from Turkey not in the room? In that case, we shall move on to France. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I was very struck by what I have been hearing from a number of speakers over the course of the past half hour, especially from the developing countries. According to the OECD terminology, a number of them would be described as developing countries. And I'm struck by the fact that they feel that Paris was a success, and why they think it was a success in the wake of the failure in Copenhagen. The industrialized countries in Copenhagen hadn't realized how important the principle of solidarity was and how vital it was that to tackle emissions for the sake of the developing countries, whose take on the whole issue was very much that we had been generating so many emissions over decades, causing the warming of the climate, which was taking its toll on them and on their environments. If you look at the least developed countries, they are only responsible for some 4% of greenhouse gases at a global level, and yet they are in the forefront of the victims. They are the front line, and they have been for a long time, and therefore there is a very great need for much greater solidarity. And I think that was understood in Paris. As other speakers have said, the important thing now is to translate that awareness into national legislation. And I don't want to repeat what other speakers have said, but it's vital that we implement more than what we agreed in Paris, because we will still be below our target of 2% warming even if we implement every commitment from Paris. Public sector assistance to development will not suffice on its own. It's going to be vital for us to have public sector assistance to developing countries within the context of OECD programs and the donor program which already exists, but it will have to be coupled with more activities which will have to deliver more assistance for climate-related goals. I have been in contact with the French ministry, and you may be aware of the fact that the French government has increased by 6 billion development assistance to the developing countries between now and 2020. But there is a condition appended to that, which is that 50% of this increase has got to be dedicated to policies which will deliver climate adaptation and climate mitigation goals. And I think this is a very important initiative. I think it's something that the rich countries need to sign up to more widely. Thank you. Thank you, says the chairman. And the last speaker in this debate is Mr. Ilman Adam from Sudan, who has 2 minutes.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Climate is a source of concern for all the peoples of the world. In the previous year, we have discussed climate change, and we submitted a proposal because climate change is due to the development of developed countries, hence the need for a fund that would support the developing countries that did not cause climate change, but which are the first victims of that change. It is also known that we are discussing today Sustainable Development Goals. But what about sustainability? And how can we talk about sustainability in light of the current deterioration in the global climate? Hence the need for laws and legislations that would mitigate climate change and that would improve the situation of the different peoples of the world. Thank you.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Je crois qu'on a fini.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that brings us to the end of the contributions from the speakers. We still have slightly more than 5 minutes, so we're going to now turn to our experts and ask them to respond to the comments and questions that have been raised from the floor. So first of all, Ileana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to respond to a few questions and comments made. And I think the first one is the comment which came in a lot of remarks is about withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. I just want to mention a couple of facts which, not to diminish the gravity of the issue, but just to give you a bit more context. While the United States have formally communicated their desire to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, formally that withdrawal cannot happen until 4 years from the notification of that intent, which will be after the next US election, just several days after. So just to note that that withdrawal might actually not happen, depending on what happens in terms of politics. Secondly, after the announcement of President Trump, about 187 mayors, 10 governors of the US states have already denounced that decision. And about 1/3 of the US population, which is 120 million, I think, of Americans, have signed the declaration. We're still in declaration, basically claiming they intend to stay in the Paris Agreement. And if you look at the size of the US economy covered by signatories, it's about 1/3, over $6 trillion covered by the companies and states and entities which have joined into that. So there is some still hope for US to address its climate change its emissions in some ways. Secondly, the comment made by, I think it was a colleague from Kuwait, and I apologize if I'm wrong, in terms of parliamentarians not being active on climate change and not addressing it. I would disagree with that statement, and I think today's discussion actually is a testament to that. I think IPU and a lot of parliaments have made climate change as a priority, and I think the research I've presented actually shows 1,400 laws and policies in place, out of which about half have been passed by parliaments around the world. So I think parliaments are being very active. I think the comment I made was rather that the annual rate in activity is slightly decreasing in the past years, and that's because we see more countries going into implementation rather than passing new laws into implementing the laws which have already been passed. So I think parliaments are very much active on climate change. Secondly, on your question about who is responsible, I think we actually have very good data on who is responsible for climate change in the past and also who will be responsible going forward. If we look at the global emissions, about 60 to 70% comes from fossil fuel combustion. If we break it down by sector, basically 25% is about heat and electricity production. In various countries, 25% agriculture and forestry, and then you can go down into transport industry and so on. If you want to look by entity, there is a recent research which is called Carbon Majors, which has traced extraction of fossil fuels and emissions associated to it to companies around the world. And what they show actually that the majority of emissions are concentrated to the activity of about 90 institutions, some of which are state-owned, some of which are private-owned corporations, and some of which are government-run industries around the world. So if you're interested, I would refer you to that. And very finally, I think few delegates expressed ideas, including distinguished delegate from Russia, in terms of working on model laws and exchanging experiences. We think that's a very effective way to actually help parliamentarians address the issue. Also, the initiative on network on renewable energy. And on our part, for example, we are working at the moment to analyze the experience of UK's climate change law, and we'll be happy to share that as well. So I think that's a very good idea. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que Madame nous donne l'espoir.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you've given us hope that America may come back to the fold. So let's hope that your hope is not misplaced and that that does indeed happen. We're now going to pass over to our two members of Parliament.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I was very surprised that so many parliamentarians are coming here. And that means energy and climate protection is a very important issue in the parliaments. And that means we need more time in Bonn to discuss and to debate this issue and to make an exchange of experience and maybe good solutions. And second, I think there's a good path for the future, because if you're looking for China or for India, there's a shutdown of coal plants, and on the other side, there's an increase of renewables. And that means we are now at a point that renewables are really competitive. For example, we have an auctioning in Chile where photovoltaic plants were the winner with less than $3 per kilowatt hour. And that is a price that is really realistic, and that's a price that is really competitive. So I think the difference from Copenhagen to Paris was that now renewables are really part of the market, and now renewables are really a solution. But now we have to come to the practice. Now we have to install renewables more and more. And so parliamentarians are very, very important, because parliamentarians are the link from the local level to the national level. And if we would be successful, we must have solutions on the local level. So that means laws at the federal level, but with impact on the local level. And so I'm a bit optimistic, and even my contacts to the US with all the engaged people on the local level, I think they will do their job, and they will do it because it's economically the best solution. Yes, that means let us look forward. We had some remarks for our draft. Thank you very much for this, especially, for example, this woman from Jordania, and we will look about that. We will maybe make some changes in the draft. Thank you very much for that, and I hope to see you all at Bonn.
Merci. On va écouter donc M. John pour 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, please. 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to I join my friend here from Germany on the comments that you made for the draft, and I'm sure that will be taken into account. I think there's 3 points that I'd like to raise. Paris was a great success, but what we need to see now, and that's where a role that all members of Parliament have, is to make sure that Paris comes to life. In other words, the commitments that have been made in Paris actually take place, and that is something that all parliaments can take a strong role in making sure that that happens within their countries. The other point that I'd like to make, that the things that the agreements that have been made in Paris, there needs to be more ambition. As has already been stated here, if all those commitments come to light, it leads to an increase of 2.7 degrees Celsius in terms of the temperature change. That is not enough for small countries. So the small island development states of the world are going to push for a 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. That should be the maximum. If we're not able to achieve that, these countries will disappear. So I hope that members of Parliament can join the small island development states in the world in pushing for that 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. And we hope that we can have your support when we reach Bonn later on this year. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Merci beaucoup. Je crois qu'on arrive donc au terme de...
Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of these presentations and this debate. And I think that there's been an awful lot of information, a lot of questions, and I think that this will really mean that we've got an awful lot on our plate, some really a meaty meal, if you like, for Bonn. And then I think that we can finish that off, that work off in Bonn. So a round of applause for absolutely everybody and for the fantastic work that has been done. Thank you very much. Now, we will let our speakers leave the podium and have the new panel to the front.
For your work.
Monsieur John. Arina. Merci beaucoup. Donc, on demande à nos experts, Monsieur
Mr. Adrian Wetman, would you please like to come up to the front? And then Mr. Idris Gifroy from Belgium and our colleague from Vietnam, please all come up to the podium.
Monsieur John Kok An. Okay. And Monsieur Andris.
Mr. Duong Kok An, Mr. Andris Gifroy, and Mr. Adrian Whiteman. So we have our 3 experts here at the top, 3 speakers. It's 2 minutes past 4. We've got an hour for this. We've got to finish at 6:30 at the absolute latest, but Mr. Adrian Whiteman here on my right will be talking to us. He's going to talk to us about associating the private sector in the renewable energy sector in particular, so we will be hearing from him. And then we've got 2 co-rapporteurs, Mr. Andris Gifroy from Belgium, and I hope I haven't made too much of a mess of that name, and Mr. Duong Quoc An, also up here from the National Assembly in Vietnam. They are the 2 who are going to be drafting the draft resolution, and that will be discussed next March in Geneva at our meeting there. In January 2018, we will have the document available on the website. People will be able to look at it at their leisure and have 2 months to prepare it and distill their thoughts so that we can discuss it at length at the Assembly in March in Geneva next year. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Mr. Andries Griffoy of Belgium for 5 minutes. Mr. Duong Quoc An will follow for 5 minutes. We will then have the general presentation before we move on to our discussion. Mr. Andries Griffoy from Belgium, floor is yours, sir.
If technology going well, we have now a PowerPoint. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Andries Griffoy. I'm a member of the Flemish Parliament and the Belgian Senate. In my entire work life, I worked and had business more than 30 years in energy management, about the whole scale about energy. I traveled a lot, I see a lot, but saw also a lot of problems about building projects in renewable energy. And since I'm now, since 2014 became a full-time politician, I like to change some things to move things forward. And so I'm very happy that we in Dhaka decided for making a resolution in the second committee, in this committee, about, and the title is Engaging the Private Sector in Implementing the SDGs, the Social Development Goals, especially on renewable energy. We are two co-rapporteurs, Mr. Duong Quoc An from Vietnam and myself. The PowerPoint is just to, let us say, the focus on what the debate has on, and with a lot of open questions so that we can have a debate afterwards so that we can prepare a resolution for the 15th January. Next.
Qui gère le système? Ah, voilà, ça avance.
Okay, thanks. So if we look to the 7th SDG, where a very important component is the energy, and there it says that to ensure access to an affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for everyone. And if we look to the figures in 2017, still 1.1 billion people has no access to the power grids. And if we look to the business as usual studies, then we see that in 2040, still 600 million people have no access to electricity. And that's a big issue, because how we can get anyone connected to the grid. And certainly then for remote areas in developing countries. And off-grid, can there be for a solution? Okay. Can there be for a solution? But in priority, of course, renewable energy. Why? Off-grid renewable energy technologies can offer a power system which is, like here mentioned on the PowerPoint, is cost-effective, environmentally sustainable, reliable, resilient and affordable. And these technologies can also trigger rural economic development, can also trigger increasing incomes, creating jobs, setting the stage for transforming livelihoods, and can save lives of mothers and infants, and would create more sustainable environments. Because for us as a developed country, green energy is a part of everyday life. But when we look to the rest of the world, not always obvious elsewhere in the world. And I have some examples. We have the unhealthy wood stores, the dangerous kerosene or petrol lantern. We have the gas or diesel generators, which are also very costly and highly labor intensive. And then the question is automatically why we have this missing link with the technology in these remote areas and these developing countries. So we have the technology, and mostly beyond the point of innovation. But for example, if we look to solar power, and if we look to small and medium wind turbines, they are modular. They have become a mass product. They are reliable and affordable. And that gives a solution for off-grid energy. And we see a lot of projects for small and medium enterprises, which can trigger then afterwards also mini-grids for local communities. So that we can go to more sustainable environment, we can create jobs, and we can trigger more economic development. And I have some small examples. The first one is an example from an area in North Africa where they have no grids, so they need irrigation, and for irrigation you have to pump water. So what they have done, they put solar panels just beside the pumps so they can pump up the water so they can irrigate. This is a very smart solution, and it's a very cheap solution, in fact. The second one is just a container full of batteries and with the solar panels on the roof. So you can put it everywhere, even, let us say, in very desolated areas. The third one is for fresh, sweet irrigation water. This is in the country of my colleague here, the Mekong Delta, where they have problems now that the water is becoming more salted. And because of that, they have problems in the future for irrigation, but also they have problems then to feed the local villages. So what is suggested now is to build a ponton where you have the blue box is a desalinated installation with pumps, but everything is driven by a small windmill. So you can pump up the water, you can desalinate the water, and you can feed the local villages, and you can also irrigate. And maybe after 1 week, you have to put it 2 or 3 kilometers farther away on the river. But I know also examples, for example, in Nepal, where you have a lot of small hydropower with micro water turbines. So there are a lot of possibilities, there are a lot of examples. But still, what we've seen then is that the question is, private sector, can they be better involved in big projects than in small and medium projects? And the answer is yes. The search for sustainable funding is not always the issue, but the search for projects is quite difficult. This would be strange, but I know, for example, in my country and also in the Netherlands, some crowdfunding funds, they're collecting money and then they're looking for the small projects, not for the big projects. And why is this? That's because, for example, when you're talking about the small and the medium projects, you have, of course, higher financial risks compared to the huge projects. Because for the huge projects, when you talk about windmill farms, offshore, onshore, mostly you have, for example, soft loans between governments. And you have clear appointments, you have clear policy and legacy. And for the small projects, sometimes the cost of assessment, license, procurement is even the same price for big projects. So for each kilowatt is much more expensive. You have also, let us say, a higher political risk because project needs involvement from the local to the national level. When you're talking about small projects, it's more to go to these local communities. And last of all, what you'll see is that you have a different DNA in the different regions. For example, you have regions where they have more, let us say, the driven from the people business, but you have other regions where you have organized and structured by the government, and you have other countries, for example, where that is done by the local electrical company. So this means, of course, that make one suitable legacy policy is very difficult. And that's the reason why I think it's very useful that we have a debate here, because if I say my summary, there is not one solution. There is not one golden bullet. There are many different building blocks have to come together, and we need for dedicated platform with best practices and lessons learned. We need for involvement for all levels. And I think also we need a very important role for the parliaments. So here you see the picture of the two rapporteurs. We have also the email address from my colleague and my own email address. Thank you very much.
Bien, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andries Griffoy, for your presentation. We will now hear from your co-rapporteur, Mr. Don Quoc An from Vietnam. The floor is yours, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I'm Dương Quốc Anh. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Economic Committee of the National Assembly of Vietnam. It's the opposite to Andre. I have 30 years working in the Central Bank, and I just moved to work in the Economic Committee of the National Assembly of Vietnam last year. And my presentation mainly pay attention to how to encourage the private sector to participate in the renewable energy. And first, I would like to introduce about the key challenges to Vietnam energy. And first, we have to meet the demand of the economic growth. We have to increase the power. While we have a limited domestic fossil resources and also have problem with water scarcity. Why majority energy in Vietnam depends on the fossil and gas and also the big hydropower. And also we have problem with air pollution and climate change. And we have a high potential for the renewable energy resources, but we have a limited budget from the government. And we also need to upgrade the unreliability in the power supply. And also the electricity grid has to be extended to improve the security of supply. In terms of this, we need to, from 2014 to 2020, we need about 50 billion US dollar for invest for energy. But we have problem with the budget from the government. That is why Vietnam had to rely on those domestic and private sector to invest in to develop the renewable energy. And how to engage the private sector to invest in the renewable energy. Since 2014, Vietnam have developed the following strategy, plan, and policy. We pay attention to, we have the renewable energy development strategy up to 2030 and outlook to 2050. And what the government have done more, that is to raise the public awareness. We let the public understand about the heavy disaster from the climate change. And we should move to, we should move to the sustainable development and also raise the need for the renewable energy development. And the people also understand the importance of the role of the private sector. And we increase the dialogue among the policy maker, business, and citizens. And the government also discussed with the citizens about how to gradually switch to the renewable energy. And we also encourage the efficient, effective energy usage and also renewable energy. And we support for the development of environment-friendly material in all industry. And since 2014, the government has taken many actions, like we improve the legal system, as mentioned in the slide 2. And we also pay attention to develop the domestic component in the renewable energy industry. And the government also issue the standards for renewable energy products and technology. And the government announced in the government website about the transparent and reliable database and information for renewable energy potential assessment. And the government also pay attention to provide training, increase knowledge, and also introduce about the new technology in renewable energy. And the government also have planned to increase investment in main infrastructure for renewable energy development. And from what the government have done, I would like to also propose and to give you some the incentive framework, how to increase the private sector investment in the renewable energy. At first, we have to develop the competitive electricity market to guarantee the electricity price can cover all the costs with reasonable profits. That is the private sector can invest in. And for the project in the development phase, the government should exempt the import tax for imported article, and also support for the domestic component production that help to reduce the cost of the price, and also provide the favorable credit condition for the loans, and also support for the land clearance. And for the project in the operation phase, the government should reduce the corporation tax or reduce the ground lease, and maybe increase the depreciation rates and give the exemption for environment protection field. And the renewable energy electricity from private plant are guaranteed by the government to be purchased at a reasonable price. And we provide the preferential land infrastructure, like a plant or grid connection construction, we will offer with a low land use field. And the government also have to extend the national transmission and distribution grid. And we also realize that if we receive the support from the developed country in this area is also very important, like transfer high technology with more incentive, or build policy that widen the access to green technology. And for the Parliament cooperation, I proposed we increase the dialogue among the Parliament to share information and exchange the experience, and increase the effective international cooperation in renewable energy development, poverty reduction, and sustainable development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc,
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We have now heard our two co-rapporteurs. I will now give the floor to Mr. Whiteman. He is the Senior Program Officer for the International Renewable Energy Agency. The floor is yours, sir, for your very important presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually from the statistics unit in IRENA. I'm the head of statistics, so I'm going to be talking a lot about figures and trends and things that are happening. Just in case you aren't familiar with us, IRENA is a relatively new intergovernmental organization, International Renewable Energy Organization, based in Abu Dhabi. a number of activities in providing technology advice, advice on policies, finance, and international cooperation. But the main mission is what we call supporting the energy transition. What is the energy transition? Well, traditional energy supply is largely centralized. It's often very large scale. It's been based on fossil fuels for a long time that are often shipped around the world because fossil fuels are only found in a few places, so they're shipped around. The transition we're trying to get to, of course, is renewable energy. Renewable energy can be done at many different scales. It's very scalable. With recent developments and particularly the expansion of renewable energy, the costs of renewable energy have fallen dramatically, and it can be much more local, so you can actually produce electricity at a very local scale. So for an organization such as this that's interested in democracy, renewable energy is a very democratic source of energy. Originally with traditional energy, if you didn't have a wire, couldn't get a wire to the grid, you just didn't have electricity. Now you can put a solar panel on your roof, you get electricity. I would also say that you as parliamentarians here, one of the things that's probably most important is dealing with the vested interests of the traditional energy sector that see this sometimes as a threat. Some see it as an opportunity, but sometimes it's seen as a threat. Just one little other piece of information about us. My colleague here, Marina, runs the Legislators Forum. We have this every year, so if you have a passion for renewable energy and want to come to Abu Dhabi to learn more, exchange and network, that happens every year, and the next one is in January 2018. Now, on to the SDG targets. There are 3 targets. One is to increase energy access to energy, either clean cooking solutions or electricity. That's how that's defined. One is to increase renewables as a share of consumption of energy, and the third one is energy efficiency to improve that. And I'm not going to talk about the third one. I'll start with the second one, which is the renewables target to increase the share of renewables in energy consumption. This graph here actually shows the net additions or expansion of generating capacity split into renewables and non-renewables. And what you can see over the last 15 years is the non-renewable capacity has generally been bouncing around the same level every year, but the renewables has increased. And in fact, for the last 5 years, renewables has been higher than non-renewables. So we are seeing in the electricity production sector, gradually the infrastructure is shifting towards renewable energy. If we look at the overall shares in consumption, renewables account for about 1/4 of all electricity production. And with that graph, what that says is it's going to increase. I don't see any problems there. It's still very low in transport, and there's difficulties getting it to expand there. And then for the heating market, which is essentially burning things for heat, it's about 22%, but one of the issues is a lot of that is traditional fuel wood. And that's not actually moving in the direction that we would like to see. So there are some issues there. Now, if we come to talk about electricity, I was very happy to see the first presentation talking about off-grid, because that's really where the renewables and energy access come together. IRENA, being a new agency, has a fairly more optimistic view of the world than the traditional energy people, and we're starting to find a lot of evidence that things are happening that are not recorded in the statistics. So, for example, the graph there at the top on the left is showing imports of solar panels into sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa. All of those countries have almost no recorded production of solar energy. Yet their imports of solar panels are running at the range of about $150, $200 million a year, which equates to about 150 to 200 megawatts of totally unrecorded solar. The graph on the top on the right, imports of solar devices, solar lights, solar home systems, again running at 3 to 4 million units a year, totally unrecorded in most countries' energy statistics, all off-grid.
very small capacity, each of them, only a few watts, but a huge number. And when we put that all together, what we end up with is about a gigawatt of off-grid energy in Africa. I'm talking about Africa here because it's the region I collect statistics on. I could put up similar charts for South Asia and possibly other regions in the world as well. So there is huge dynamism and huge things going on, and all of this is happening largely without any government intervention at all. Some of it, some of the capacity you see there is actually in North Africa, where governments are very involved with the development of mini-grids, but a lot of this is just happening in the markets. And if you put that together, what you hear is, you heard earlier that there is, 1.2 billion people are supposedly off-grid, not connected to the grid. Well, in the last few years, millions of these people, if not hundreds of millions of these people, have basically decided to solve this problem for themselves. They are buying this equipment, they are installing it, sometimes with government help, sometimes on their own. But we estimate that possibly about a quarter of these people that are supposedly off-grid are actually getting electricity from renewables. Admittedly, not a lot. Sometimes it's only lighting. But it's a significant thing, and once they start with lighting, then they will expand and they will move up the market chain. Also, in terms of finance, the companies that are often involved in this are also raising funds incredibly fast. So there's about $500 million in the last 3 years gone into what they call these pay-as-you-go solar companies that will install a panel on the roof of your house, and essentially through your mobile phone and mobile banking, boop, you pay $1 a day, and after 6 months or a year, you own the solar panel. And it's a very acceptable model, because in the past you were paying $1 a day for your kerosene to put in your kerosene lantern. So basically, we hear about the business as usual scenario and the doom and the gloom, but actually a lot of these things are happening at the moment very rapidly without a lot of pushing. The same is also true, actually, when you look at governments and government investments. We talk about other SDGs. We want to have clean water, improved water supplies, health, vaccines, better education outcomes, more communications. Solar and renewables are being used in all of these applications as well. And again, in the last 2 or 3 years, phenomenal growth in these things. And this is something I think that you as parliamentarians, looking at cross-sectorally at many other different sectors of your economies, can have an influence in trying to encourage this. It's being done as well because basically it's the cheapest solution. It's cheaper than using diesel off-grid. The one area where we don't have a lot of growth, or not as much as could be expected, is bioenergy. There's a lot of potential to increase electricity production, and there's a lot of opportunities for trying to work out solutions that combine waste management, production of food, and the generation of electricity. That's not really been thought through very well. It's very complicated. Some countries have developed it very well, others not so. So that's just a very quick whirlwind tour of some of the recent things that are happening. So I was asked to also talk a bit about public policies. There's no one solution fits all. In fact, I think this slide is largely the previous speaker from Vietnam came up with a lot of very good statements and things along the lines I would say as well. The first thing is to realize that renewable energy is not a charitable thing. It's not a green thing that's just left up to the Green Party in your country. It's a business. Irene has always been very clear about that. It's a business, and it's an increasingly competitive business in terms of delivering energy. The policy frameworks we find that are working are the ones that give very clear overall direction and supporting measures, targets for renewables, timelines and processes, but often there does need to be quite a bit of detail about how to go about these things. It's fine to say, yes, we want to have a 10% renewables target, But there's all sorts of issues like, how do I get access to the grid? Who's paying for it? If there's a subsidy, is this going to be paid by consumers, or is the government going to subsidize this? A lot of details. And IRENA, with its renewable readiness assessments that we've done with countries, we've worked in a lot of areas to try and help countries figure out what's best for them. As was also mentioned by the first speaker, the country DNA differs. Some countries have a very private sector orientated solutions, others have a utility solution, others have a government solution, so there's very different solutions. In terms of you being parliamentarians, there is this opportunity for direct action in the procurement, and also support to the private sector, and I think Vietnam gave a very good examples of the kinds of things that could be done there. So, I mean, I'll just quickly bounce through this slide to say many of these activities were on that presentation from Vietnam. The biggest issue we have is often scaling up, so getting renewables at scale. And when you start to mobilize finance at scale, often the biggest issue is guarantees and risk. Renewables make money. There are people with money prepared to invest in this. They are just always nervous about the country risk. So that's really one thing where you as parliamentarians can help to mobilize private finance. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Nous avons entendu des très beaux.
Thank you very much. We've heard a very fine presentation there from our co-rapporteur and from Adrian Whiteman. As you know, as of today, on the basis of the debate we're going to be having now, we shall prepare our draft, which will then be conveyed and ready by March. So I'll give you 2 or maximum 3 minutes, because now we are getting the main course ready. Well, let's say we have 3 minutes, and then we can interact on the basis of what we've heard. Mr. Plaset Busin Pong from Thailand, and I am sorry if I have mangled his name. And then Ms. Silvia Dingla from Romania.
Pour 3 minutes.
3 minutes each.
Mr. Chairperson, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, in Thailand, considerable number of companies are increasingly recognized for their potential contribution to the implementation of the SDG. Each of them set its own target and strategy with the SDG, then align its business operation toward that direction. And for them, SDG is a synonym of corporate governance. There are currently 17 private companies from Thailand listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, DJSI. The world recognition for commitment to sustainable business practices, reflecting their organizational engagement to sustainability. As a result of the government policy on renewable energy development, the consumption of renewable energy grow up significantly and continuously. This leads to heavy investment on renewable energy projects by a private sector. In Thailand, we also set a goal to increase a share of renewable energy consumption from 8% in 2015 to 30% in 2036, contributing to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in the country. For more than a decade, the country has applied sufficient economy philosophy principle, guided by His Majesty the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej. The said loyal philosophy had deepened down to local communities to become self-reliant in using clean energy. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, In summary, the Thai delegation would like to make the following recommendation to further advance the uptake of renewable energy. First, government have an important role in supporting the research and development, promoting efficient of energy system, encouraging private sector to involve in renewable energy. Second, knowledge and technology transfer, both national and international level, is important for enhancing sustainable energy. Third, parliamentarians also have a key role to play in developing legislation to facilitate renewable energy development. Fourth, environmentally friendly idea and SDG knowledge should be incorporated into an educational curriculum to raise awareness among the youth of the next generation. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ms. Silvia Denla of Romania, followed by Ms. Anna from Cyprus.
Ms. Chairperson, distinguished colleagues, I would like to bring to your attention a few examples that I believe are of relevance for our discussion here. In the Romanian Parliament, in the energy field, the Parliament fulfills its functions through mainly the specialized standing committees. And here I refer to the Committee for Transport and Energy, Committee for Economic Affairs, and Environmental Committee. These are both in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies. To ensure the country energy security, in 2017, on the top of our parliamentary agenda, we have amended the law on promoting energy from renewable sources, and also we have an ongoing evaluation on the National Authority of Regulation in the energy field. Also, we are in the process of adopting by law the energy strategy of Romania for 2017-2030 with the perspective of 2050. I would like to mention that this is the adoption of a governmental strategy by law. It's a premiere in Romania and for our parliament. Also, in order to increase the cooperation between state representatives and the business sector, in 2016, we have adopted the law on the public-private partnership. Also, we are examining the possibility to create a lobby register based on the model of the European Transparency Register and to pass a lobby law. Based on our experience in Parliament and lessons learned so far, we would like to propose to our co-rapporteurs to take into account for the draft resolution the following aspects: the importance of transparent, inclusive, and accountable policies and decision-making processing for developing renewable energy sources as a means to ensure an effective and efficient engagement of the private sector. In this respect, a binding period for public consultation should be included in the relevant governmental and/or parliamentary legislative procedures. The importance of having a medium-long-term national energy strategy meeting sustainable development targets. Such strategy must be based on political consensus and wide public support and needs a strong legal foundation and adequate institutional and budgetary frameworks, hence the key role of parliaments. Also, the need to constantly improve the national regulatory frameworks in order to provide policymakers with legal instruments establishing rules and patterns of transparent and accountable collaboration with the business sector and civil society as a golden key to achieve the SDGs. Measures aimed at laying the grounds for ensuring secure and sustainable energy at affordable prices, such as...
Votre temps est fini.
Your time is up. I would be very pleased if the lady from Romania could send her document to the co-rapporteur for it to be taken into account in the report. Thank you.
Également, on souhaiterait
Thailand, we know that you had a document. I wonder if you'd be kind enough to give it to the co-rapporteur. Anyone with a written document can directly bring it to the rapporteur so it can be included in any report. Thank you.
on va donner la parole à Madame
We'll give the floor to Ms. Anna Diogolo of Cyprus and Mr. Ari Babu of India could perhaps stand by.
The 2030 agenda reflects the common objective to respect and protect the world we share. It provides us with the framework in which we, as the elected representatives of our people, must focus on individual and collective actions towards ensuring a sound economic, social and environmental future for all. Although the executive arm of government sits at the wheel of the effort to implement these goals, the other key actors, such as national parliaments, civil society organizations, and the private sector, all have a pivotal role to play. This is especially true of the role that is played or can be played by the private sector. As the pillar of a nation's economy, private companies, whether small family businesses or multinational corporations, are perhaps and or should be major players in SDG implementation. In the field of energy renewal, no matter how large or small, the private sector has long been the largest piece of the puzzle. In fact, many of the recent transformative ideas, research and technological developments can be created and credited mostly to the private sector. Nobody can doubt that the private sector has contributed to a great degree to the major advances in the production of clean and renewable energy around the world. It is for this reason that the private sector should not only be involved in production and distribution, but should continue to contribute to any future strategy formulation and perhaps be given a seat at the table. Despite this major progress, many companies are still slow to recognize their responsibility and potential contribution towards clean energy. Specifically, the shift from traditional fossil fuels to renewable energy sources has been slow. This may be due to the fact that the private sector in general places financial benefit at the heart of their business strategy. In fact, when left alone, many businesses do not endeavor to integrate sustainable development targets into their growth agenda. This is especially true for countries such as Cyprus, who is in the midst of a period of recovery following an economic crisis. In this situation, there is no doubt that the private sector, as a mechanism for survival, will concentrate on its bottom line and the safeguarding of their employees rather than work to ensure global sustainability. It is for this reason that national parliaments must be proactive with their mandate. Legislation should be passed coupled with scrutiny of government policy to encourage the private sector to actively and broadly engage in implementing. Realizing our collective vision of building a just and sustainable future for present and future generations depends on safeguarding, promoting and implementing the SDGs. This will take time, long-term commitment and a resilient effort for all sides, including the private sector. Only with an honest collaboration and participation of all sectors of society can we hope to achieve the goals and targets set by the 2030 agenda. In parallel to the previous set, let all continue to plant trees and educate our children to do so in years to come. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, c'est gentil pour avoir.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to have kept to the 3 minutes. We'll hear from Mr. Ari Babu of India, followed by the representative from Russia.
Honorable Chairman and distinguished delegates, we have a gigantic task ahead to meet the targets under SDG 7 that seeks to provide affordable, sustainable and modern energy to all by 2030 by substantially increasing the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix and by improving energy efficiency. We as parliamentarians have a responsibility to promote and facilitate greater participation of various stakeholders, including the private sector, in the entire cycle of power generation, transmission, and distribution. In India, we are implementing a national solar mission through which, under implementation, it has witnessed high levels of private sector participation. We are installing the solar parks ranging from 100 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. And we are also encouraging the households to install their own rooftop solar power systems. And we are also encouraging the replacement of existing agricultural motor sets, pump sets, by solar pump sets. In India, we have set a target of 175 gigawatt of renewable energy generation in the next few years. This reflects India's commitment and consistent efforts towards promoting clean and affordable energy targets set under SDGs. India, along with France, pioneered a global platform called International Solar Alliance. I invite all the nations, like-minded prospective countries to join this alliance. While promoting private sector participation in the energy sector, we must bear in mind and ensure that the private players do not get attracted to only the economical attractive projects, neglecting the rural and the socially important belts. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Cette fois-ci, notre collègue.
Thank you very much. You kept to the time. Could we please have the document? Please give your document to the Secretariat. Ms. Ilya Gubarova of Russia, followed by Mr. Yon Kim of South Korea.
Господин председатель, действительно, сегодня, на мой взгляд, прозвучала очень важная мысль у докладчиков.
I'm sorry, we're not hearing the interpretation from Russia.
A very important idea has been voiced in terms of the solution of this very important topic. And in this regard, I would like to dwell upon several proposals. First, as we are parliamentaries, and a legislative aspect is very important for us, and in Russia, a relative law on energy efficiency was adopted in 2009. But as I see it, laws are not to operate if relative governmental projects are not adopted after the laws. And Russian experience is very interesting in this regard when a governmental decree has been adopted on the incentive mechanism on the use of renewable sources of energy, and state program on energy efficiency has also been endorsed, and it involves sub-program on the use of renewable energy. Why am I talking about that? As governmental documents imply financing, and so only adoption of laws won't allow us to reach goals if we do not have a program which has real financial mechanisms of implementation of those goals. Besides, I would like to share the following thing with my colleagues. By 2018, we'll have a law devised which is to stipulate energy efficiency increase and energy savings technologies, and it's a crucial thing to have. The next important goal is that in 2017 it has been planned to introduce and to enact a law which will make enterprises and regions be liable for energy monitoring and to conduct carbon reporting. They will be interested in the use of renewable energy sources and the way to use them, and also the way to use intellectual energy, and regions will be interested in this regard as well. So our first proposal is the following. Legislation is to be closely connected with the relative activities on behalf of the government, and the programs which exist in Russia can be introduced and they're enumerated. Russia has substantial resources of hydrocarbons, but it aspirates for the use of renewable energy. And our experience in remote and hardly accessible regions of the Russian Federation is very interesting. I would like to give you a small example. Solar energy is developed in the number of regions of Siberia, and that's how the electric station in the Bategai settlement in Yakutia is the northernmost, and its equipment is able to withstand temperatures ranging from +40 up to -40. I know about the time limit, so I would like to conclude with two proposals. The first one, it's very important that states and large-scale companies allocate grants for SMEs, for them to take part in those projects. That is what our esteemed expert has mentioned. And to conclude, I would like to say that intellectual energy is impossible without personnel training, and Russia has this program as well, when we train personnel at the universities for us to have experts qualified to work in this regard. Thank you.
Yes, please send your written text to the Secretariat. Thank you.
On va écouter maintenant Monsieur Seon Kim, Corée du Sud.
Mr. Seon Kim from South Korea. Jamal Al-Hai, please get ready.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, it is a great pleasure and honor to address today. I'm Kim Se-yeon, a member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the UN in 2015 are mandates for every country in the world. Some of the key components of them are sustainable energy and climate change response. The Paris Agreement, the shared commitment towards a step forward by the international community, expected to drive the transition to a low-carbon society. Recently, remarkable progress has been achieved in technological fields such as renewable energy, smart grids, and energy storage systems. In 2015, global investment in renewable energy stood at a record high to $86 billion. Globally, renewable energy also accounted for 29% of power capacity and 24% of power generation. If we take hydropower into account, the increase compared to the previous year is around 9%. In Korea, we are also witnessing a considerable growth, around 10% annually, in the supply of renewable energy, but its portion stays yet at a mere 4% of primary energy. Thereupon, the Korean government adopted Renewable Energy 2030 Implementation Plan, which aims to generate 20% of total electricity with renewable energy by 2030. As a member state of Mission Innovation, Korea is faithfully carrying out its commitment to double public R&D investments on clean energy technology over a 5-year period from 2015. Hence, we are encouraging public-private partnerships to lead this transition rather than leaving the responsibility just to the government. For this purpose, we are strengthening the Renewable Portfolio Standard, so-called RPS, making it mandatory for public institutions to install new and renewable energy equipment and improving regulations on sites and the environment. Furthermore, we are working to help change environment for private companies to voluntarily invest in this field, such as by readopting the feed-in tariff, which had been abolished for years, and installing generation subsidy programs. The Korean National Assembly considers the government's sustainable energy policy as a top priority and will make every effort to provide necessary legislative support with the fellow parliaments at IPU. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for keeping to the time. We're going to hear from Mr. Jamal Al-Hai of the United Arab Emirates, followed by Mrs. Doris Lacouvette from South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. سيداتي والسادة، للبرلمانات دور محوري في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وذلك بحسب.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are taking action in favor of sustainable development and the representation of peoples before governments. The growing number of parliaments throughout the world should work in favor for participation and, above all, participation with the private sector. The Parliament of the Emirates believes that the role of Parliament should be reaffirmed to encourage the participation of the private sector in the SDGs, particularly renewable energies, in providing them with everything they need. Also, seminars must be held in which experts from all sectors, both public and private, plus representatives of local and regional organizations should also participate, as well as representatives of human rights organizations. We should also invest further in renewable energies and develop new solutions for society in the field of renewable energy. It is also important to maintain an ongoing dialogue between the government, the private sector, citizens, and civil society, so that they can participate more along with the private sector for sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, we in the Emirates attach great importance to investments in programs for sustainable development, as also for the preservation of the environment and social and economic improvement. The 2021 agenda stipulates that we must have a sustainable environment, and for this purpose we should conserve our water resources and work with green energy and clean water. We are taking initiatives for this purpose to improve the environment, and we are developing sectors such as that of renewable energies, solar energy, for instance. We make use of solar energy and nuclear energy in several fields. We have a station in Abu Dhabi for solar energy, and the town of Masdab in Abu Dhabi has a station which is considered as being top-notch in the region. It produces nuclear energy, and we will be the first Arab country to have nuclear power-based energy. Thank you.
Je vous informe que la liste.
I would like to inform you that we have come to an end of this short session. We'll move on to the next speaker, Ms. Doris Lacoube from South Africa. Shiying Dangying of China, would you please stand by?
Chairperson, though our energy relies mainly on coal, our country managed to launch a program which is regarded as the best in the world, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, which is aimed at increasing private sector participation to further develop the renewable energy sector in our country, creating jobs, particularly for the previously disadvantaged groups, increasing participation and involvement of previously disadvantaged businesses in the energy mix. So far, the program has yielded the following positive results, and we anticipate further advancement as we continue to pursue our goal of ensuring electricity for all by 2025. Attraction of domestic and foreign investments to the value of over 200 billion rands. Procurement of 6,422 megawatts of renewable electricity from 112 independent power procurements. Creation of over 30,000 jobs and spending of over 15 billion rands on socio-economic development initiatives, including youth empowerment. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, c'est gentil.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to hear from Mr. Ying Dani from China next, followed by Ms. Washika Khan from Bangladesh.
Dear colleagues, allow me to share with you some situation about China's development of renewable energies. After we entered the 21st century, China's energy consumption has been growing rapidly. Since 2010, we have become the largest consumer of energy in the world. Improving our energy mix, increasing the use of clean and low-carbon energy sources are our priorities. We are committed to developing non-fossil fuels energies and efficient and cleaner use of fossil fuel energies, with a view to significantly reduce our emission from energy consumption. In the past 10 years, China has improved its legislative framework for renewable energies. In 2006, we passed a legislation for renewable energies, and it is in force now. In 2009, China amended its law on renewable energies, and this amendment entered into force in 2010. China has introduced a lot of policies to support the development of renewable energies. We have introduced the pricing policies for electricity generated by photovoltaic, waste incineration, and offshore wind power. After 2016, we have tried to optimize the use of electricity, to optimize the use of renewable energies by introducing a monitor and assessment system for the efficiency of renewable energy usage and to encourage local usage of renewable energies. By the end of August in 2017, China has become the largest investor in renewable energies for 5 years in a row. The installed capacity for renewable energies has reached 6.3 million megawatts. That accounts for 36.5% of our total installed power generation capacity. China supports the participation of private capital in new energy industry. We have provided incentives and guidance for private enterprises in the sector. We will continue to grow renewable energies so as to create more jobs and improve our energy mix. In 2016, the renewable energy market created 3.4 million jobs for Chinese people. That number ranks the first in the world. According to our numbers, among the top 500 new energy enterprises, around 100 of them are from China. And 80% of those enterprises are private companies. The Chinese government will continue to offer policy support to create a more open environment for state-owned enterprises and private companies in this area, to create a leveled playing field to further develop our renewable energy sector. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, distinguished panelists and delegates. The government of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina recognizes that energy is the key ingredient to alleviate poverty and to improve the socio-economic conditions of the people. The government has given priority to implementation of renewable energy efficiency, as well as energy conservation programs during the 6th five-year plan. The renewable energy policy was approved in 2008. Through this policy, the the government is committed to facilitate both public and private sector investment in renewable energy projects to substitute indigenous, non-renewable energy supplies and scale up contributions of existing renewable energy-based electricity productions. The policy envisioned 5% of total generation from renewable energy sources by 2015 and 10% of the same by 2020. To facilitate this, the Prime Minister has actually made sure that all 350 MPs have to spend from their yearly allocation for development work 50% on projects for renewable energy. That comes to about 40 billion in our local currency yearly. I'm sure you all know that the solar home systems growth in Bangladesh has been really rapid. There are more than 4.5 million home systems installed already, and it's growing rapidly. An agency, the Sustainable and Renewable Energy Development Authority, SREDA, has been established. Several fiscal incentives have been extended by the government to renewable energy project developers and investors. Dedicated funding support has also been extended through government financial institutions like Bangladesh Bank, the central bank, and ITCOL, as well as through private commercial banks. Many fiscal initiatives have been, including duty exemption on certain renewable energy products. For example, solar panels, solar panel manufacturing accessories, LED lights, solar-operated light and wind power plant has been introduced. The government of Bangladesh, led by Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, understands the issue of climate change and how renewable energy can reduce that. Thank you for your time.
Merci beaucoup, madame.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Ali Ismaili from Iran, and Mr. Roger from Zambia will be the following speaker.
به نام خدا. بسیار خوشحالی.
It's a great pleasure for me that we have this opportunity to attend in this meeting and exchange, fulfill the constructive dialogue with our participants in the renewable energy. As you are aware, access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable and modern energy for all it wants in the most important goals are to achieve sustainable development. To achieve this goal, the Islamic Republic of Iran has paid particular attention to the promotion of the sustainable modern energy as a core issue in the 6th National Development Plan. Although the main source of the energy in Iran is fossil fuels, namely oil and gas, and nearly 11% of the global oil reserve and 60% of the global reserve of the gas is attributed in Iran, there is a enormous potential for the developing renewable energy source in the country by the aiming of the growing the energy needs in the coming decade. Having said that, to pursue the building of the required capacity renewable energy source, the Islamic Republic of Iran seriously looking for the participation of the private sector. In this regard, the Iranian Parliament to provide the facilities of the participation of the private sector in the energy market. Accordingly, in the 6th developing plan, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the share of the renewable energy which is belong to the private sector has been increased, and all of the allocation of the tax exemption between the 5 to 13 years, as well as the provisions are for the guarantee for purchasing electricity generated by the private renewable energy produced by the private sector. These are the samples of the supportive measures which taken place by the Iranian government. My dear colleagues, promotion and raising the public awareness in terms of the environmental economic benefits of the utilization of more renewable source of the energy and the vital role of the private sector in this the 6th developing plan of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We pay attention induced to that. In this regard, we are trying to develop the sustainable development in the country and based on the legislation which is adopted by the Iranian parliament in this regard. We are also enjoying to have a cooperation with the other countries for the viable energy, which is a very reliable and will be without also easily to be accessed for everyone. In this regard, I thank you for your attention.
Nous allons écouter donc M. Roger de la Zambie qui sera.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roger from Zambia, and Ms. Vanda from Indonesia will be the following speaker.
Il est là, Roger?
Is Mr. Roger in the room? Has he stepped out for a moment? In which case, the next speaker will be Ms. Vanda Soyundana from Indonesia, and she will be followed by Mr. David from San Marino.
Madame est là? Elle n'est pas là.
Is our colleague not here either? Okay, in that case, Mr. David Forlanili from San Marino is now to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Recently,
Le suivant, c'est M. Jennifer.
And Ms. Jennifer from Zimbabwe will be the following speaker.
okay, thank you. Recently, UN countries adopted a set of sustainable development goals as part of a new sustainable development agenda. Each goal has specific targets to be achieved over the next 15 years. In particular, to reach these goals, everyone needs to do their part: governments, the private sector, civil society, and ordinary people. In particular, private sector can be involved in reaching such goals by enforcing the role of Parliament in private-public agreements. Renewable energies are fundamental in improving the quality of life and control the climate change. Therefore, it is extremely important that stakeholders from the industrial, service, and educational sectors are involved in this loop. Acting locally for improving global conditions is the optimal way to achieve common targets, such as sustainable development goals. The parliaments all over the world should consider the role of private sector in performing such kind of goals. Thank you.
Bien, merci beaucoup. Vous êtes très, très gentil.
Thank you very much indeed for those kind words. We're now going to hear from Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable colleagues. Zimbabwe has enormous solar energy potential. If fully exploited, can supply 10,000 gigawatt hours of electricity per year. To accelerate economic growth, there is need to harness clean energy to meet the demands of all stakeholders. Statistics released in 2012 by the Energy Commission revealed that the energy balance or mix in the country is in the percentage terms of 51 wood fuels, 19 coal, 12 liquid fuel, 13 electricity, and 5 solar energy. The statistics are evidence that there's need for both government and private players in the energy sector to collectively work together in tapping solar energy and other renewable sources of energy in order to meet the country's power demands, as well as the sustainable energy for all by 2030. Beyond doubt, sustainable energy for all is only achievable depending on the condition and the contribution of all stakeholders. Efforts to promote use of sustainable energy have already begun in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, through government departments, parastatals, the private sector, and civil society, the country has made efforts to implement the Sustainable Energy for All campaign. A gap analysis has been crafted by the Ministry of Energy and Power Development. Civil society is already in action. A civil society advocacy statement on SE4O has been produced. The following are the expected actions by civil society in Zimbabwe. The government can develop national energy plans and targets, provide financial support and remove counterproductive tariffs and subsidies. Companies can make their operations and supply chains more energy efficient and form public-private partnership to expand the use of sustainable energy products and services. Investors can provide seed money for clean technologies and invest in both on and off-grid energy solutions. Industry, government, and academia can contribute to technology innovation. Civil society groups can train entrepreneurs, engage in advocacy, and demand accountability. The media have also shown the will to help raise awareness on renewable energy and sustainable energy for all. To date, 3 companies, 1 local and 2 foreign-owned, were granted licenses by the Zimbabwe Energy Regulatory Authority to build a 100-megawatt on-grid solar power plant in sunlight-abundant province of Matabeleland South. I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Merci.
Thank you very much indeed. I apologize for interrupting you, but we're now going to go back to Indonesia. Ms. Vala, who's ready to speak now.
Mr. Chair and all honorable delegates, Indonesia would like to deliver several ideas in this matter. First, it is imperative for government to formulate a collaborative mechanism among stakeholders to address issues related to SDGs. This mechanism must also be available at the local level. Second, it is important for the government to include SDGs issues in education. Early education on SDGs may contribute to the creation of a sustainable society. 3, the government needs to clarify the role of private sector in the context of sustainable development, especially in empowering private-public partnership. The availability of clear regulations, both in terms of incentives and technical partnership, is strongly needed. Fourth, innovation is necessary to mobilize resources in achieving the successful implementation of SDGs. This is also applied to encourage private sector to formulate corporate policies based on sustainable development. Fifth, the process of transfer of green technology from the developed to the developing region should be at ease. We also need to provide incentives in order for green industry to grow and encourage the relevant stakeholders to develop, produce, and make affordable green technologies available for the market. The Indonesian House of Representatives is currently discussing the amendment of law on energy, which has been included in the National Legislation Program 2015-2019. The new bill is planned to regulate the development of new and renewable energy at all sectors. In 2009, Indonesia passed law on environmental protection and management, which formally recognizes that the decreasing environmental quality is a serious problem for Indonesia and that climate change presents further systemic threats. With this law, environmental issue should be concerned in every policies. And as for your information, Indonesia is a home for 40% of the world's geothermal resource with the potential of 11 gigawatt, more than 75 gigawatt of hydro energy potential, 200 gigawatt peak of solar power, 60 gigawatt of wind energy, 32 gigawatt bioenergy resource potential, as well as 17 sea-powered resources. Yet, from the total capacity of 443 gigawatt, only 2% of the new and renewable energy potential that have been utilized. I thank you all for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Je demande à...
Thank you very much indeed. I would like to ask Ms. Randa from Indonesia to send the document into the Secretariat, because that would be very useful. If you could send it to the Secretariat even immediately, that would be even more useful. Mr. Samap. And then Ms. Agnes from the Netherlands.
Samap la Turkey.
Mr. Samap from Turkey.
Okay. Dear Chair, our country has important potential in renewable energy. In May 2009, the strategy paper on electrical power market and supply security was adopted. In this scope, one of our 2023 goals is to make the electricity generated by renewable energy have a share of at least 30% in the total energy production in our country. Turkey's projected hydraulic capacity is 160,000 gigawatt hour per year. Wind capacity is 48,000 megawatt. Geothermal capacity is 31,000 megawatts. By 2016, Turkey reached 80,000 megawatt of installed power. The breakdown of installed power by resources by end of December 2016 is as follows: 27,000 megawatt hydraulic power, 60,000 megawatt wind power, 1,000 megawatt geothermal power. Turkey's geothermal installed power reached 1,000 megawatt in August 2017, making our country fourth in use of geothermal power around the world. The share of renewable energy resources in total electricity production was 32% in 2016. Compared to EU countries, the share of renewable energy is high in our country. We aim to maintain this high proportion and increase it if possible. Hydraulic energy has the largest share in renewable energy production in Turkey. While having a small share in the energy mix as of yet, it is expected that the proportion of wind and solar energy will increase thanks to the recently implemented YECA project, which is Renewable Energy Sources Project. For example, this project is also taking place in wind power. The contract for building a wind farm of 1,000 megawatt in 5 different regions with the condition of local production within the scope of YECA was tendered on 3rd August 2017. The contract was won by Siemens Türkerler Kalyon Consortium, which is constituted by Turkish and German private company. Finally, renewable energy technologies also contribute considerably to economy, environment, and social equity, which constitute the 3 pillars of sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je vois que la salle se...
Thank you. I see that our numbers are declining a little, but it would be nice if people could stay and listen to the later speakers in the debate. Zanies from the Netherlands will be followed by Adam from Sudan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your presentations, especially the hopeful presentation by Irina that so many people are using solar power and it's not even recorded yet. So that's a hopeful message for us all. And maybe we can all become ambassadors of the SDGs. In my country, I'm an ambassador for SDG number 7 and number 13. And many of my colleagues are ambassadors. We should all become ambassadors. And sustainable renewable energy has to be financed, and it has to be financed by our taxpayers. And in our country, for instance, if you want to have renewable energy, the taxpayers pay extra taxes. Now it's about 50 euro, and in 2020 it's about 200 euro. So in our country, the Netherlands, the people are going to pay for the transition, and we have to divide it equally. So I ask for your attention to this important subject. And of course, if we want to finance this huge transition, then we have to finance it in a very sustainable way. So we have to use revolving funds. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. Then we call them investments in sustainability, but we don't finance it sustainable way, and this should be done. In our country, we have the Dutch Development Bank, and they have been giving loans to all kinds of sustainable investments, and they do it in a way in high risk countries, high risk investments, but it pays off to do this, so we should all do this, and we can learn from that. And in our country, we just have a new coalition, and this coalition wants to be on time in Paris. And we want to achieve the goals that we have spoken out to achieve in Paris. What we are going to do is to try to do this with our colleagues in the European Union. But if the colleagues in the European Union do not deliver, we want to do it with a group of countries around us. And that's the way to do it. And I ask you all to do it because we need a level playing field for all of our companies, for all of our jobs worldwide. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We've still got 7 countries on our list: Sudan, Morocco, Jordan, Uruguay, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Lesotho. Mr. Adam from Sudan will be next, and then Morocco, please. Thank you. In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate. Chairman, first of all, may I first explain to you that the program of renewable energy that we have is part and parcel, of course, of the SDGs, as we know. And therefore, we need to do all we can to achieve that program. We have to make sure that we have clear statistics so that we can be aware of what our needs are in terms of renewable energy. In Sudan, we have sunshine year-round almost. And statistics show that, in fact, we could have renewable energy, quite a considerable volume thereof. Unfortunately, over the past 20 years, we have been under embargo. We haven't actually been able to benefit from the necessary technology. However, those sanctions have now been lifted, and so we are trying to achieve these objectives. And in particular, we're trying to involve the private sector as well. The private sector, of course, needs encouraging. It needs incentives from the government, from the public sector, in order to acquire the necessary technology, and in order for us then to be able to produce renewable energy, which will help us and help us then achieve SDG number 13. Which is reducing emissions. Now, in Sudan, what we hope, what we really wish for, is that the sun carries on shining year-round so we can achieve these objectives. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now hear Mr. Noureddin from Morocco, followed by Jordan. Thank you very much, President. The private partners who are involved in helping us with achieving Agenda 2020 in 2013, well, that is a very laudable objective. So is reducing fossil fuels emissions. Now, we do have a $2 billion worth of solar array in Morocco, helped by money from the EIB and the French Investment Bank, hundreds of millions of dollars. But private sector has an important role to play where it comes to reducing emissions, CO2 emissions. They invest in public transport, in trams, electric buses, electric cars. They invest also in waste treatment plants. public ones, and also in lighting for public areas. But I just wanted to tell you about the local experience in a town, Saleh, near the capital. And there, a private company is part of a PPP, public-private partnership, private to 49%, and the local municipality has 51% for public lighting. So, first of all, the objective was to reduce CO2 emissions and also reduce energy consumption, which was set at least 41%. And then we wanted to make sure that there was light available. So that went from 68% to 93%. That's between 2014 and 2015. That meant that there were certain neighborhoods, poorer neighborhoods, that could actually then have lighting. So we went from 90 to 24 hours in 2014. So we also were able to reduce about 600 tons of CO2 per year. Now, okay, that's not an awful lot, but if all towns were able to invest along those lines, we'd see a real reduction. So we've really got to encourage these PPP partnerships. I think we have to pass laws as legislators to encourage public-private partnerships, and we also have to strengthen our laws on multinationals. We want to get them to be investing more, and also we've got to look for financing. Look for that under carbon funds, and we, as legislators, have those duties to carry out. Thank you very much. The Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Ziad from Jordan, and then we will be hearing from Mr. Eber from Uruguay, please. Thank you very much, Chair, and I would like to thank all speakers for their very interesting comments. Circumstances and the economic conditions that we are living through in our country have had a real effect on our economy and on the environment as well. As you know, Jordan is suffering from what is happening with refugees. We're in a real situation of crisis in our country. We've had an increase in our population in Jordan of 33% over the past 5 years because of the refugees that have come to us, in particular our brothers from Syria, that is taking up 25% of our national budget in Jordan. The effect of this has been huge pressure on the country, and so Jordan has adopted new economic strategies. We have passed new laws on the private sector so that we can get the private sector participating in the renewable energy sector. It's a renewable energy strategy that stretches from 2015 to 2020. And we hope that there will be up to a 20% increase of renewable energy by 2020. So the participants are all from the private sector, and the government has contracts, and they are obliged to buy the products of these private companies, what they produce. So this is part and parcel of Jordan's obligations under the Paris Agreement. Now, on the green economy, well, we haven't heard an awful lot about that. One way, for example, of saving energy and having green renewable energy, there are ways of doing that, and it's very important for developing countries being able to store renewable energy. And the production of renewable energy, of course, or the levels of production do change from day to day. And, of course, it changes from season to season as well. Now, we do hope that we are going to be able to provide sufficient quantities of renewable energy at affordable prices, reasonable prices, so that we can use this in developing countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, says the Chair. The floor now goes to Mr. Heber of Uruguay. And then the other three speakers, please, will be next. Mr. Heber, first of all.
Il est là?
Is he here, the senator from Uruguay? If he isn't, we will move on. Kuwait now. Mr. Abdul from Kuwait instead.
I have a question. I'm trying to use the presence of Mr. Whiteman from Arena here in this conference. Anyways, we're from Kuwait and we have oil and sun, and both of them is a problem because the sun we have is accompanied with dust, so we cannot use a lot of solar energy, and we're trying to do our best with having renewable energy, except we do not have a perfect setup for us in terms of a combination of what kind of things we can use according to our environment, weather, and so forth. The measures we've been doing is to have new refineries and lower the subsidies to lower people's need for fossil fuel. There is a big challenge we're encountering where the private sector is not encouraged enough to participate in this thing. Lack of planning, future projects offered by the government, and of course there is no market for renewable energy products and so forth. Lack of finance funds. Banks are not willing to invest into this because there is no, it is not feasible, or the projects are not feasible for these projects. The only way is to force the society to use renewable energy, and we have three ways of doing this: enforce the society, or create awareness and give some investment incentive for people to use renewable energy. Coding system for buildings and so forth for the government. We've been working on that for a time now. At the end, my question is for Mr. Whiteman, I'm sorry. What is the best solution for us? You are very close to us. You're in Abu Dhabi. You know what's good for us, what's not good for us. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Kuwait. We've got two more on the list. Mr. Adel Jafar from Bahrain, who will be followed by the last speaker.
Il est là? Il n'est pas là?
Is he not here? Last speaker then. Oh, I do beg your pardon. Yes, you are there. Please take the floor. In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think we have got an economic recession in a number of countries these days, which is why we do have to encourage the private sector to use renewable energies, and we have to make life easier for them by providing support and aid. Now, in our Gulf countries, we are doing an awful lot on renewable energy, and I would call on all countries to encourage the private sector through financial incentives and aids, for example. And we, as parliamentarians, must legislate to force countries to use renewable energy. The Gulf states have reinforced their level of investment in renewable energies, and we are preparing ourselves for the period post-oil. We've seen a two-thirds reduction in the price of oil recently, which is why we have started to use renewable energy more. But we've got to increase that level of use. In Bahrain, for example, renewable energy is going to be used to the tune of 10% by 2035. And we do hope that we will be able to increase that figure too. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. The last speaker now from Lesotho, please. The floor is yours. Lesotho, please.
Mr. Chairman, my approach to this discussion is a little bit different in that I'm not going to talk about my country as such, but for me, renewable energy provides an obvious potential for trade and development. However, there is no doubt in my mind that the challenge for developing countries is to create a conducive environment for investment. It is this area that requires attention, but sadly receives very little attention. Worse still, there would be trading partners have a vested interest in keeping it that way. Why? That leads me to the second challenge, which is that the sources of energy are in abundance in developing countries, be it solar, wind, hydro. But the technology and finance lies elsewhere. It is this imbalance and this contradiction that is a major problem for global development. And this is our biggest challenge, and this is what we need to focus at. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Bien, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed. We are moving towards the end now. We have heard comments from a lot of people, a lot of proposals, and a lot of questions. So we will now turn to our two co-rapporteurs. They've heard everybody, and let us ask them what their strategy is going to be, what their approach is going to be, and then what they will give to the Secretariat as well to produce by January, something that we can have on the website before the meeting in March next year. So the co-rapporteurs as well, and then we'll be asking the expert too. So the floor is yours, Mr. Gifra, first.
Thank you all for your contribution. What I've also heard this afternoon and what I also learned is that there's a big awareness. Every country wants to achieve the targets. There's no discussion about that. Let us say that maybe 10 years ago, there was maybe discussion how we have to achieve. No, I heard everyone, I think it's about 25 speakers. They all say, we want to achieve. We want to achieve the objects, the targets. Maybe there's a discussion how you can achieve, how you can get to targets. And that's also what I have in my summary that I said, there is no golden bullet. So even for you, Kuwait, I think we can discuss that. There's innovation. Now we have solar panels which are controlled, for example, by drones, so that they can see where there's a problem, which on panel, etc., etc. So technology is not a standstill technology. It's always moving on. But of course, it's depending of the price cost, the efficiency cost, etc. So what we have seen in the past, if I look to, for example, my country, this Belgium, a developed country who has given a lot of financial incentives, for example, for the solar panels. And because of that, everyone wants a solar panel on his roof. So now about 10 to 15% of the households, 10 to 50% of the households has already, even in a rainy country, a solar panel on their roof. And not, in fact, because an SDG, because they never heard about that. Not, I think, about the climate, because it was a financially interesting product. But because of that, you have, of course, then the mass production. And because of this mass production, the solar panels are much cheaper now. Prices decreases. And so now we can use it everywhere in the world. But how we can then implementing in other countries like developing countries, etc., there I think that we still need to look how we can make the role of the parliament is very important, the role of the policy, a legacy, etc., is important. And there I think it's very important that we have the best practice and lessons learned, that we can bring it to one platform so that one can learn from each other. So if I may conclude, I think that I heard from different countries, education. So I think this is important, education from the beginning to all students, that they are aware about climate, the SDGs, etc. On the other hand, we need research and development. Research and development, I think this has to be done mostly from the developed countries. That's what you see, that's what has passed. I heard mostly 50% of the countries ask about public-private partnerships. This is a possible solution. It's not always very easy to organize it. You have to be aware that sometimes you have also big lobby groups who want then to change the legislation and policy because it's also in their advantage. But there's a possibility. You have then to create a good solution. I heard also local communities are very important, and I think this is also right. You cannot go to a legacy or policy which is really top-down. I'm from the government, so I say to the local community, have to do it like this. If the local communities don't believe in that, they don't do it. Yeah? That's politics. That's the DNA of a country, of a culture.